Welcome, everyone. I am so excited for this conversation that we're going to have today. I am with three friends, and we're going to talk all about networking. So we're going to network as we talk about networking, and we hope that you get some inspiration. And to get us started, I'm going to actually allow my three guests to introduce themselves. So let's start with you, Odette. Can you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yeah, my name is Audette Sophia. I live in north of San Francisco, and I run a company called Catalyst Arts that is experiential and entertainment design and production in the Bay Area. And I'm very passionate about elevating the social experience and bringing more connection and meaning to all the kinds of events.
Fantastic. Bailey Hancock, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hi, everybody. I'm Bailey. I'm a connection strategist and professional friend maker who teaches people how to build, nurture, and leverage relationships to succeed at all the things. And so I have a podcast called Seeking the Overlap and a book in progress by the same name. But I'm super passionate about helping people figure out how to build reciprocal relationships and symbiotic and collaborative communities.
I know when I heard that title, professional friend maker, it immediately drew me to you on Threads. One of the very few people I met on Threads.
Yeah.
I've slowed down over there. So excited to have you on the show. Michaela, we've known each other the longest. I'm excited to have you and maybe Isla on the show, your daughter. Makes an appearance, but go ahead and introduce yourself.
Yeah, we're at dinner time in Canada, and I'm a working mom, but I am a big believer in just coming, showing up as you are, and being there to network as you are. Okay.
We get two for the price of one with Michaela.
Absolutely. Well, it's real life. So
yes, exactly. I am trying to become a professional friend maker. I started on LinkedIn as a creator and eventually turned it into a business where I help other people do what I do in terms of creating and strategy and all of that good stuff. So LinkedIn is kind of my passion, and it's rolled into my new book coming out in February called No Fear Networking, a guide to building connections for the socially anxious professional. And just like I said, it's all about showing up as you are, not just kind of giving up because you have social anxiety or you're introverted or networking just isn't your jam. Finding a way to make it work for you and just showing up as you are.
Fantastic. And you guys know I'm Phil Mershon, but my reason for this conversation is I've seen the power of networking at conferences when it's done well and people make connections that become lifelong friends. And I've been to the events where it feels like you're back at a junior high, middle school dance and no one wants to step onto the floor. Everyone's concerned. I actually had this experience this last week, and I was speaking at a conference, and there was someone who came to the event late. And I had those feelings in my stomach of, do I want to say hi? Is she someone that I should know? It ended up being one of the best connections at the conference, and I'm so glad I overcame that little bit of fear that's there. Let's get your origin stories. Why is networking something that you're concerned about? And Bailey, let's start with you, the professional friend maker. How did you get into this in the first place?
Being a professional friend maker has been woven through every job I've ever had. And it was a title that I jokingly gave myself about 10 years ago when my then 4-year-old nephew was like, Aunt B, what do you do for work? And at the time, I was doing partnerships in biz dev and community growth and actually events for General Assembly in Los Angeles, which was a continuing education company for tech business and design skills. So I was responsible for bringing new humans to our physical campus, growing our email list. And I chose to do that through partnerships with well-aligned community groups who needed a space in exchange for emails and promotion. And so I was like, well, I guess I kind of make friends for a living and then help them figure out how to play together. And he was like, that's not a job. And I was like, actually, it's exactly my job. And it sort of stuck. And then every job I've had since has also included being a professional friend maker. So it was a joke in the beginning. Now it's sort of, I realize, like the perfect encapsulation of my identity, which is I've always been a cross pollinator. I've always been somebody that's been part of a lot of different communities, a lot of different groups of people. In high school, I was involved in anywhere from like 8 to 10 extracurriculars at any given point in time. It was too much. That's too much. But that's just sort of my personality. I'm a joiner. And because of that, I, from a very early age, discovered the beauty and value in having a lot of different human beings in my world and being able to take something that's happening over here and apply it over here and connect this person with that person and really bring ideas and connections across all of my circles. And so the whole idea for my business, Overlap Collective, and my podcast, Seeking the Overlap, is about finding the overlapping piece on the Venn diagram between you and the people around you. So that's professional friend maker and how it's kind of played out in my career. And then now as an entrepreneur running my own business.
Fantastic. And we're going to get to in a little bit how that relates to events, but let's go to Audette. Give us your origin story. Where did this become important to you?
Yeah, I feel like, well, I would say I got into professional events through the festival world. And so that's a very kind of like open-minded kind of community where you actually do experience a sense of community. I've been in performance troupes and groups, and so kind of coming from that and into the corporate event world. And also I did all this work with Joanna Macy, whose body of work is called The Work That Reconnects. And she does all these really powerful exercises, helping people find, connection and meaning and do this really powerful kind of activist work. So I had this kind of eco work background and this festival background. And then I came into the corporate events world and was like, ooh, we've got some work to do here. There's like, so I guess it's a part of my passion, and it's sort of always been about the intersection of kind of arts and creativity and like social experience and what's possible at that intersection, as Bailey would say. So I have been brought in to kind of do icebreakers and to warm people up and to facilitate networking. And I have created my own series of collaborative networking events, but mainly it's just been kind of social artistry and making events better.
I love that term, social artistry. I need to just use that. That's amazing. Michaela, you can start wherever you want to. I know it's a long story for you, so give us a short version of why this is such an important topic to you personally.
Yeah, Cliff Notes version is that when I was in my 20s, I had an anxiety attack while I was in a lecture hall. Felt like I couldn't escape, ended up in a washroom stall for a few hours before I could build up the courage to get myself home. And then from there, I developed agoraphobia because of this fear of that happening again in public, and battled that for about a year and a half, where I couldn't leave my house, couldn't go to restaurants, just totally terrified of people. And I finally got to a point where I had to make a decision to be terrified of people for the rest of my life, or show up, with my toddler yelling boogie, boogie, boogie on live camera. And I chose the latter. And from there, I was able to, go into professional speaking. I speak in front of thousands of people. I'm a LinkedIn learning instructor. So I'm constantly in front of the camera, which, in theory is like the opposite job of what I should have. And which is why I wrote the book that I did. And so that's kind of why I started, because I really just, especially when it comes to the book, I wanted to show people what was possible, and also not make it that here's how to get over social anxiety and become an extrovert, because for many people that's not realistic, and there are so many strengths that come with social anxiety of being more empathetic. And so it's really about using that superpower to your advantage at events. And yeah, that's kind of why I love what I do, because it's so personal to me, kind of starting where I was and to where I am now.
So let's start with something you told me this summer, Michaela. And that is, I think you told me somewhere over 95% of people struggle with some form of social anxiety.
Yep.
I don't know what it is in terms of the percent where it's actively prohibiting them from engaging. Do you have a sense of what that stat would be?
Yeah, so social anxiety is a spectrum. That was something that really made me kind of go, wow. They say between 95 to 99% of people have social anxiety. It's something that's biologically built into us. Actually, the only people that don't have social don't have social anxiety are sociopaths, because without that mechanism, if we didn't care about what other people thought, we would all be going around, just causing havoc, right? So it's something that's biologically ingrained in us. Back in the day, if you said or did the wrong thing, you'd be banished from the group and you'd be eaten by a lion. We are not going to be eaten by lions if the group does not like us anymore. But a lot of us still act like that is the level of threat. And so there are some people that have social anxiety in very specific situations, being on stage, maybe being stuck in an elevator with people that they don't know. And other people like me, when I had agoraphobia, are obviously on the other end of that spectrum where it's a lot more extreme. But we're all kind of in this together. There are so many people that have initially told me when I was interviewing them that they don't have social anxiety, and then mentioned, but I just don't like small talk, or I just don't like speaking on stage. So we all have a dislike, is usually because there's a fear that is kind of like rooted somewhere, right? So I think that's why the book is so important, because it's something that we all deal with in one way or another. And hopefully it'll help people, even if it's not networking in a large group. Maybe it's getting on stage or doing a presentation at work.
And when we're planning events, Naudette, you know this super well, that some percent of the people walking through the door are feeling anxious when they get there. And if it's their first time, probably most everyone has a level of anxiety when they're arriving. What are some of the things that you do, Audette, in terms of the experience design that might help people feel more at ease and make it a little bit more comfortable to enter into the friend making that Bailey would talk about?
Yeah, I think, as social people, we are always kind of scanning our environments for cues and clues on how to behave and how safe it is and do I belong and what's allowed here and all those kinds of things. So especially when at the very beginning of an event, the more kind of signals of warmth and safety and pleasantness that you can kind of front load, the more people kind of pick those signals up and relax and kind of are like, okay. So I think, my company, a lot of the time we get hired to make the cocktail hour better by bringing, greeters and hostesses and stilt walkers, or somebody who's literally wearing like 100 glasses of champagne and like, drinks are on me, So those are like maybe a little gimmicky kind of wow factor ways of impressing people, but really I'd say like the energy of those performers being warm and welcoming is actually more important than the flashiness of it, because it's just it's almost an extension of whoever is hosting the party. They generally don't have the bandwidth or the ability to stand there and welcome everyone like you would want to be welcomed to, by your host, but you want to give people that warm experience. So I think anything that, this is a tricky thing, because often the welcome experience is like some horrible logistical like registration with a line, and everyone's like, oh, please let me find the bar. Like that was horrible. So trying to figure out how to kind of soften and warm and humanize anything about the entryway, whether it's plants, whether it's beauty, whether it's performers, whether it's just literally somebody there saying, thank you so much for coming, welcome, like that can go a long way. And I'll just tell you a quick favorite entry experience that I was no part of producing. It was a random corporate event. And I don't know if this was even planned or spontaneously, but like all the people would stand at the entryway, and when a new guest would come in, they would like applaud them. They'd be like, ah, like a roaring applause. And everyone was like, okay. And you saw this kind of like dopamine rush of like feeling famous and welcomed. And everybody got this just like heart opening dopamine experience walking into this party. And they didn't have to hire anybody for that. That was just a crowdsourced thing that they did that was incredibly effective. And that may be kind of extreme, but it's like that signaling to people that they're wanted, they're welcome, and that they're safe goes a really long way when it happens at the beginning.
Sometimes it's the unexpected, and Isla's going to love what I'm about to do. Last night, I was flying home from a conference, and they had given out these toys as an example of one of the illustrations that was given during the conference. And it became a gag for people to take a picture with this toy wherever they were going. And I decided I wanted to win. So I got on the plane early and I went up to the pilots and said, or actually one of the stewardesses, and said, would the pilots be willing to let me take a picture with this? And it's a chicken. And they got so much of a kick out of it. It became a gag for all of the flight attendants. They put a seatbelt around it. They put a mask on it. They were taking pictures. And then one of the flight attendants had her back to me. And so I did this. And everybody in the front of the plane was dying, but it created connection. I think that's the point, is sometimes the unexpected. Now, that's just like what you said. That's maybe over the top, but we can do things like that. Bailey, you're an expert at helping people make friends, but at events, what are some things that you've seen work well?
I think anything event organizers can do to take the guesswork out of what attendees are meant to do is really helpful. So whether that's an activity that people can do if they aren't chatting with somebody, so like a prompt on the table, or even having like prompts around where people can use that. I love an event that has a bingo card. I think that's such a creative way where it's like, find somebody that's from this state, or, where you're trying to basically go on a mission, on a hunt to find people. That helps people discover what's in their overlap with other people, because you'll start to see people would walk around being like, hi, excuse me, is anybody here a dog owner? And then automatically they now know all the dog owners. And if you're a dog owner, then it's like, oh my gosh, we have something to talk about right away. So it kind of serves the purpose of giving people something to do with their hands, which we're kind of also moving into a cultural shift with drinking, I think. And that's going to be very interesting to see how that plays out for events and networking and conference cocktail hour, because a lot of younger people especially are not drinking the way that older generations have. And that is usually the way that people feel comfortable enough to start talking to people, is liquid courage. So I think anything event organizers can do that like gives people an activity that if they're not immediately ready to just walk up to somebody cold and start a conversation from scratch, which nobody likes to do. It doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter how extroverted you are. It doesn't matter if you're a professional friend maker. Nobody wants to do that. So if you can give people a heads up of like, okay, here's a thing you can talk about, here's an activity you can do, it just helps ease the transition into the event a lot more than just putting it all on the attendees to figure out how to begin.
Odette, you said something earlier that corporate events in particular don't do this very well. What's one of your pet peeves? And I'm going to ask all three of you, what's a pet peeve that you have about events and things that they do that make networking hard?
Well, I would say my main pet peeve is this kind of falling back on the defaults of like throw people in a room and give them alcohol and they'll figure it out, or if there's music and things to look at and things to do, people will be happy, or we hope people have fun, but we hope people connect, but we're not facilitating it in any way. So I would say that's my main pet peeve, is there's these kind of standards and these ways that things are done and these defaults, and people just even professional event planners who've been at it a long time will kind of just fall into those, or like make the assumption that because this is the standard structure of an event, or this is the standard way that it's usually done, that they should have that structure and that flow. And I think that the structure and flow and design of an event should actually come from, what is the intention here? What are we optimizing for here? And if it's a networking event, the answer should be, we're optimizing for people to be connecting with each other. And some of the default settings are actually an antithesis of that. And so if you put that at the center of your puzzle, or as the North Star guiding you, and then you kind of throw out the default settings and the assumptions of how it's going to be structured, or where it's going to be, or how registration is going to happen, or how people will find each other, and just say like, what are our just start brainstorming from the intention of what you want people to experience and receive and walk away and say at the end. You kind of reverse engineer back from your goal, your experiential goal. Then you actually can come up with some out of the box ideas or some creative things, or you can look, ask people on LinkedIn, what are their ideas or what's worked for them, or, you open yourself to actually like vibrant, fresh ways of doing things, versus just kind of churning out these same old kinds of events again and again with like teeny little variations. Like I think I get bored when it's just like there's nothing fresh and vibrant here. There's nothing surprising or unpredictable, and the brain doesn't actually put events into long-term memory unless there's something either highly emotional or something surprising or something we haven't experienced. Novelty and emotion and strong connection and excitement, and those are the kinds of things that actually make us create a memory. And everyone's always dropping the word memorable about events, but they're not actually doing the things that create memorability. And so you have to question your defaults, and really, design from the experience outward instead of from the default setting.
I totally agree. I used to believe that if you just called something networking meetup, networking party, networking plaza, literally we do all these things, that it would happen. And it does signal this is a place, this is a time for that. But if you don't add to that the way to make it happen, then the people, especially who are uncomfortable, are going to leave. So, Michaela, what's one of your pet peeves when it comes to networking at conferences and events? You're muted right now.
I think two things. Number one, I think that there's this one size fits all, which is kind of what you guys have been talking about, where it's okay, this will work for everybody without taking into account individual personalities, without taking, I think about even some of the speakers that I talk to, some that have ADHD and some that have autism. Are we actually taking these things into account when we're creating events, or is it just kind of, oh, well, this will work for the majority of people and doesn't really matter who doesn't fit into that box? The other thing is that I have found with a lot of events, it becomes a very all or nothing. You either need to go there and be able to go to all the parties and do all the things, and keep up with the extroverts, or you kind of lose out. And I think that it kind of goes hand in hand with it being all or nothing and one size fits all, where there has to be a different approach, I think. I personally love, at social media marketing world, the little nightclub. I think it's probably different for me because I go to the speakers party, so it's smaller, it's more intimate. But one of the things that I saw coming up with other people was that, they didn't like the noise, they didn't like the darkness. And so in cases like that, it's kind of okay, well, maybe doing something that has that same sort of casual vibe, but maybe you're sitting down. I know for myself, as I was writing this book, I was thinking about what are the things that make me feel most comfortable when I'm networking. And a big one for me that came up was standing versus sitting. If I'm standing, I feel very stiff. I feel like it's very formal. Especially if I'm standing at a cocktail table, I don't feel like myself at all, because that's not something that I normally do in my everyday life. But if I sit down, there's something about looking somebody in the eye, person to person, being close to the earth. If we're going to get very talk about beauty and all these things when it comes to events, being closer to the ground, so you're actually grounded, and speaking directly one-to-one, it allows, at least for me, for deeper conversation. And one more thing I want to say about that is that extroverts are really good at small talk. They don't have that same fear that introverts do, or people with social anxiety do. People with social anxiety have higher levels of empathy, meaning that they're really good at those deep conversations. So creating spaces that not only allow for the little chit chat and that small talk, but also to go a little bit deeper, so that those people that are not maybe great at the small talk, but will excel at the deeper conversations, I feel like both groups will be able to walk away from an event feeling like they got somewhere. They were really able to connect and network with people.
You just said something that's one of my pet peeves, and I wish we could change this in the world, but we used extrovert, introvert in the wrong way at events. And social anxiety is a better way to describe what many of us mean when we say introverted. We do it because that's what everybody else says, but it's misusing the word a bit. And I think it doesn't help us when we're designing events, because someone might be outgoing, but still feeling very anxious and vice versa. So I would wish we could change that. I don't know that the four of us can change it in the next year, but maybe in a lifetime we can get better language around this. And I think, Michaela, your book's going to be very helpful to that point. Bailey, what's a pet peeve that you have when it comes to networking at events?
plus one to what they both just said, but a big one for me is assuming that an evening cocktail hour is good for networking. Like that it checks the box. Like we've made a spot for people to meet each other, right? When in reality, that feels foreign and uncomfortable for almost everybody. And again, it doesn't really factor in people who are neurodiverse, people who are socially anxious, people who don't drink, people that are really their energy is gone by the end of the day. Like that's what always drove me crazy at conferences or events. You're going and learning and talking and absorbing all day. And then you're supposed to drag yourself to another thing where you arguably have to be the most energetic in the whole day. So my favorite connection facilitation opportunities are morning things like going on a walk. You know, if you're at a beautiful property, then having it set up where it's like, okay, at 8 a.m., we're going to go on a 30-minute walk. Join us if you'd like. That way people can grab a coffee. They can stand next to each other, not face to face when they're connecting, which can be really helpful for people. My son is autistic and I'm a self-diagnosed autistic. I haven't gone through the whole process, but the more I learn about his autism, the more I have a suspicion that I'm on the spectrum too. And I'm the most extroverted person I know, but I'm very highly masking. And I have a lot of sound sensitivities. So if I'm walking into it's the hotel ballroom or the conference ballroom situation, right? Where it's like tall ceilings, like paper thin walls, and a ton of people crammed into one small square, and you're supposed to scream over each other to have a conversation. I will be in my hotel room. Thank you very much. No, thank you. So I think building in multiple types of opportunities throughout the day is very conscientious and intentional of event designers. And I think the more activities you can build in that are with movement, that's really helpful too. Because I think when you're moving your body, you can sort of be less in your head and more in your body. There's a lot of presence and embodiment that comes from that. So I think that's really, really helpful. So not just standing there, like Michaela said, like at the high boy or, high top, you're just standing there awkwardly. It's like, get some movement in. And then you're also building a shared experience with people, right? It's like you can reference later at lunch. You can be like, oh, Audette, wasn't that view gorgeous this morning? Like, I can't believe we got to see those ducks eating bread, whatever, right? It's like you have a shared experience and that helps bond you to people as well.
So true. Oh man, I had 3 different things I wanted to ask you guys. So I was at a conference this weekend and saw somebody who on the external, she looks like one of the most gregarious, outgoing people that you could meet. She stepped onto an elevator. She was the last person and it was packed. And by the time we got to the 19th floor, she was having a panic attack. And so the reason I share that story is because can't read from the outside how people are interpreting our events. But I'm wondering, and Michaela, let's start with you. How can we watch for those signals and what can we do to be more supportive of the fact that we have no idea how people are responding to the things that we've created?
Yeah, I mean, there are so many questions and questionnaires that are built into registration. I have never seen any sort of registration form where they ask, where are you most comfortable? Where do you feel uncomfortable? What are some things that you'd like to avoid at the event? There are so many ways to phrase it, but that's a perfect example of somebody that is on the spectrum of social anxiety and can maybe do everything else. But when they're in a small contained space, that's like they're, nope, not doing this. And so I think from the very beginning, knowing as much as you can, because, there are some times where people don't know what their triggers are. But I think a lot of times, especially at our ages, we know. We know what events we like to go to. We know what kind of situations we feel most comfortable in. And so really taking the time to figure out that information from the get-go, from the registration point, not only is going to be helpful for event planners, but also for the person that's filling out. Like it matters for the person that's filling out something saying, I feel most comfortable, and the event planner actually caters to some of those comforts and discomforts, right? Like think about that as like an event attendee. So I think that would be probably the most important way to decipher it. The other thing that I wanted to mention is that a lot of people that I spoke to especially people on the spectrum, on the autism spectrum, talked about having some sort of controlled environment. So a lot of times, like Odette mentioned, throwing people into a room. For some people, that's like, woohoo, no rules. For other people, myself included, structure is freedom. Structure is confidence, right? Knowing what kind of role you play and what the person that you're speaking to plays can be make or break for some people. There are a lot of speakers that are really, really good at what they do on stage, and then they get off stage and they have no idea how to talk to the person in front of them. Why? Because there is a very clear role when you're on stage talking to people versus off stage where you don't really know what the rules are. Mm-hmm. Right? So having different types of events, some that are kind of more, hey, you've got an hour at lunch, go and hang out with people, but other ones where it's conversation topics and letting people have conversations around that. Okay, everybody, she doesn't like the story. That would be a way to cater to both groups.
I love that. Odette, you wanted to add something to a point that we just made?
Yeah. I just want to piggyback on Bailey's point about how movement is kind of another vehicle. I guess I would say maybe a pet peeve about conferences is how they're so biased. They're so strongly biased around mental and intellectual that like the content is king kind of paradigm, that like education and mental stimulation and content becomes so huge and central that everything else kind of falls into secondary or just falls away entirely. And so there's a lot of different ways of giving people belonging experiences or connection experiences or positive experiences that are not intellectually centric at all, including getting them moving together. There's like, the morphic resonance of that, or there's having people experience emotions together, or having people do an activity or action together. If you think about team building, there's a lot of diversity of how that's done, and sometimes just doing an activity or volunteering together is actually more bonding than like sitting and unpacking and talking and learning together. So anything that kind of brings in action, activity, ritual, music, like the things that we humans have been doing for thousands of years that have bonded us together, I think those being artfully woven in is really wise, because again, we're just not just brains walking around, we're whole beings and we're social beings. And so I wanted to put that point out, is because actually the events, I used to throw a series of events in the Bay Area. They started out Synergy Laboratory, and then the Co-Laboratory, and then the Co-Lab. And there was no content, there was no speaker, it wasn't a networking. It was just bringing a bunch of artists and creatives and people together and doing kind of experiments in collaborating and in co-creating and in synergizing. And then sometimes they were structured experiments, and sometimes it was just like, anything goes, try stuff you've wanted to try. What do you do? Oh, can you beatbox under my dance thing? Or can you, it was just very experimental. And this kind of wide open culture that was just like, I just crave that kind of thing. So I had to create it because I didn't find it. And, I think there's a natural bonding that happens when you're doing something with people. So that's something that can get woven in, and having the diversity of activities, like Bailey said as well, like something, a craft table for the introverts to sit down and do, or, and I'll just say one more thing, which is like a tool for your tool belt, or as if you are creating networking events. I think it's really powerful to actually give people some kind of role or game or structure. And like a really simple one is to be like, your mission, if you choose to accept this, and I've put this onto a card before and handed it to people, is like, your mission is to find out one thing to basically meet somebody else's need here. So like, who do you want to meet? Oh, okay. And then you become like a matchmaker. So if everybody at the event is thinking of themselves as like, I want to make a meaningful, relevant connection for somebody, that's the game we're playing, then suddenly like that really helps a lot with the anxiety. Because if you're like, I'm like looking out for myself, what am I gonna get? How many cards? Am I gonna feel good or bad about how I did? And like me, that's the thing that makes you feel weird and inauthentic and anxious. And as soon as you flip that script and are like, who can I help and how can I make an introduction? Then you realize everybody in the room is thinking that way too. We're all suddenly taking care of each other. Facilitate that connection for each other. That's like the most simple game structure you could possibly think of, but it does create some kind of purpose for people that also meets the need of helping people actually find the kinds of connections that will make them feel like it was worth showing up.
I love all of that. I love the secret mission element. One of the things I hate that event organizers often do, and I've been guilty, is assuming that if I create a game like bingo or using an app, that everybody's going to love it. And the truth is competition motivates maybe 20, 25% of the people that are coming to the event. And those people are going to be absolutely all over it. But the way they do it ends up being very inauthentic. They're just after one more hit, one more name, they want to turn that card in to win the prize, as opposed to what you're saying, Audette, is how can we be of service? Or a different way to do it is offer some questions that help you become like a detective, because there's very interesting people around you. And can you find someone who has done this or done this, which is a form of the bingo card, but you're not rewarding them. It's the reward is the discovery.
Right.
Bailey, what do you think?
Absolutely. I think hitting people on their specific motivator is great, but there is definitely no one size fits all approach there. I love like a deck of card questions that people can choose from to answer and to also ask others. I ran an Art of Connection workshop at a retreat a year ago, and I gave everybody in attendance a list of 30 questions broken up into kind of light, medium, heavy. And what I inspired everybody to do was like find an overlap with every single person that you come in contact with. Obviously, the overlap is my thing. And so what it did was it allowed people, the way that I set it up was I said, next time you're in conversation with somebody, whether it's waiting for lunch to start, grabbing more coffee, walking back to your room, whatever it is, pick a question from the list that you want to answer, tell them the answer, and then they get to pick one that they want to answer, because it also lets people show up at whatever depth they're in the mood to show up at, because not everybody's going to want to answer the deep, dark, vulnerable questions, but some people like me prefer the deep end as opposed to the small talk light stuff. So it really, anything you can do to give people agency over how they connect with other people also goes a long way in making them feel like somebody gave a damn about what they wanted and how they wanted to be received and supported in this environment. And that's massive. And I think that also goes back to the beginning of whatever the event is, right? Like setting the tone before they even arrive, right? Like Michaela said, with the pre-question surveys kind of things. Like if somebody were to say on there, what kind of environments do you feel most confident and comfortable meeting new people in? Regardless of how it actually played out, I would automatically be like, oh, this is going to be a different kind of event. Like they care about the people showing up here. And I think that says so much. So again, giving people agency over how much they reveal, how they want to answer questions, that's huge. And then from there, obviously, the more you become comfortable with somebody, the more likely it is you're going to be willing to share more. But I think letting people show up how they want to show up is pretty huge.
So Michaela talked about being most comfortable if she could sit down as opposed to being at a cocktail. One of my fears is sitting down and being across from someone that I want to escape from it. And it's a lot more awkward to get out of that conversation if you're both sitting down than if you're standing up. Michaela, what do you have to say about that?
I think this all comes back to the fact that it's not one size fits all. You know what I'm most comfortable with? So you're saying it's like, and I never even thought of that. Now I'm probably gonna think about that, Phil. Thanks. But I think that that might be part of the issue, is that sometimes I'm talking to somebody when we're both standing and they're looking over their shoulders, and I'm automatically thinking they're bored, they hate me, oh my God, they're trying to escape me. Like I need to just walk away. This is torture, so those things go through my mind versus somebody that sits down, that's signaling to me they actually want to speak with me. So that's kind of like the difference there. You guys have said so many things. This makes me so happy that you mentioned so many things that I talk about in the book. Audette, you talked about like play and games and things like that. There's this thing that we never think about as adults, but with kids like Isla's age, when they're little, they don't have the ability to play together. So there's something that's called parallel play, which is you put kids together, even if you homeschool your kids, you bring them to the park so that they can both play in different sandboxes, but they're in the same vicinity. And okay. And they still are able to reap the social benefits. What did you hurt? Okay. They're still able to reap the social benefits of being in the same space, but even though they're playing in different separate spaces. And the same thing is true, Bailey, you mentioned with crafts. That is unbelievably smart, because that is what I'm talking about and what I researched in the book of parallel play, of setting up some puzzles or having little crafts that people can do together. I know that all of this sounds really simplistic, but for a lot of people, it is actually very simplistic. They just have to find different ways to connect with other people. So I hope I kind of captured some of the things that you mentioned, but parallel play is so valuable. The last thing I want to say too is that this is great that we're talking about this, but why are we not teaching it? It took me, I'm 38 years old, and I just wrote the book on networking. We kind of assume that we know how to network, but for anything else in life, whether it's writing, marketing, anything that we're in, we are trained to do it, and we have to learn how to do it. Why are there not events that are offering
I'm trying, Michaela.
a session on networking for people that struggle with it? Not everybody's going to want to take a class on networking, because we all like to think that we're either great networkers or we just don't need help. But what about those people, you mentioned about having a question and the question cards. Well, do most people know that you should end that question with a question for the other person? Naturally, no, a lot of us don't. So that's something that I think needs to be taught to people. And I think it would make a really big difference, not just for the event, but for future events, to have one session at the beginning of an event that is just, it could be 30 minutes of, here are some ways that you can make the most out of this event by networking and finding those spaces where you can really shine.
It sounds like we talked about this, Michaela. It's like we're going to do a networking for introverts session at our conference.
I would love to. Yes, we have to do it.
The conference culture is to bring in experts in every other sphere. And then why don't they do that with the networking? They just leave it to chance, make it organic. Even when I've been on a committee with an association that was all about networking for the events industry, and they just didn't do a single thing to facilitate it. They didn't hire or bring on a single person. They didn't prioritize in the budget, or even just bring in somebody who's willing to do it for free for exposure. Like having some front loading, some expertise, some catalyst, some facilitation. And obviously I think, it can be overdone, or it can be done poorly, and people might have a bad experience. So it's like, it's not a heavy-handed thing where let's turn this into a big workshop. But just a small, well-designed and well-delivered icebreaker or facilitation thing at the beginning of an event can make the world of difference. And so I think maybe having that expectation and culture of bring in the Audettes and the Baileys and the Michaelas and the Phils to facilitate this, to make sure your networking event doesn't suck like all of the sucky ones. And then that once we become used to that, then when we go to the ones where there's nothing happening, there's no fun business card bulletin board game, there's no facilitator, there's they're throwing us in a room with alcohol and hoping for the best, then that becomes this old paradigm that's looked down on instead of the norm. And that it's expected that everything else is elevation and activation and blah blah blah. Why has that not taken over the networking events? We're still operating in these boring defaults more than not, and that does frustrate me. So I'm just kind of putting a little battle cry, have higher expectations for your connection events, and bring in experts, because they do exist. If you don't know them, just ask for a referral on LinkedIn or hire any of us. And just have them help. It will help a lot.
I want to tell a quick story because we used to do a networking for introverts workshop before the conference started every year. And one year we had a couple hundred people there, and a guy was in the room who you would never expect. He was an on-camera talent for CBS Sports. You'd think, how could he possibly need this? He's very extroverted, outgoing. But he told me afterwards that it was the most important thing that he did. It helped him overcome his fears. He made connections in the room. And I think that's the benefit. And I want to ask you guys about this because I think it starts even before they step onto the event campus, so to speak. It starts before, the forums that Michaela talked about. But if you have any kind of community that people can be part of before they show up, or an orientation where people can make connections, they're going to be way more likely to keep building on that than if they show up and they don't know anybody. And I see all of you nodding your head, but Bailey, I'll let you respond to that.
I'm dying over here because this is literally what I do. I work with event organizers to help them pre, during, and post facilitate connection for members. But my main thing is helping individuals understand how to connect better with other people in event scenarios, in retreat scenarios, in conference scenarios, whatever it is, whether it's an hour-long event or a 4-day event. And we talk a lot about networking for introverts or socially anxious people, but I would argue that extroverts sometimes need just as much guidance, because not to call all extroverts sociopaths, however, there is something to be said for the people that you would guess are extroverts. Sometimes they can come into a networking scenario like a bulldozer. They can come in so hot, they can come in so confident that it sort of intimidates the people they're talking to. And a lot of times, I think extroverts can lack social cues in terms of reading the room and understanding whether the person they're talking to is feeling seen or respected or asked any follow-up questions of their own information, to get their information. So one of the trainings that I do is for sales and biz dev people who tend to fall in that extroverted category, to help them understand how to approach networking events or just events in general with less of a close the deal kind of mentality and more of a relationship building mentality, where it's like, you're not trying to sell anybody tonight. That is not the goal. You're trying to meet people who may refer you business. And hey, if you're lucky, they might actually sign up for your thing too, or buy your thing too. But it's really switching it from this sales or close or collect as many business cards as possible vibe to one of, I'm curious to see who's here, who I have a good fit with, who I'm curious about, who I want to have a follow-up conversation with. And there's so many things that people can do when they're attending events that are just low-hanging fruit, easy things, like having a go-to templated email that they can send to people when they're standing in front of them. So let's say Audette and I meet, and I'm like, oh my gosh, we have a lot of overlaps and I would love to keep this conversation going. Are you open to having a virtual coffee chat in a week or two after this? If she says yes, I have a templated email ready to send to her that's with my Calendly link. It's hey, it was so great to meet you at this event. I loved that we talked about fill in the blank. Here's my link to set up time for the coming weeks to continue the conversation about blank. And then I can send that. I can get her email at that moment. I don't even need to take her business card, right? So there's little tips and tricks like that that are really easy to implement that make forming connections that will carry beyond the event so much more likely and less time consuming. Because I know we've all felt it. We've collected a bunch of business cards, gone back to our hotel room that night and been like, I'll do this when I get back. I can't do this right now. I'm so tired. I'm drained. I got to just either get a drink or watch a movie and go to bed. And then you get home, you go back to your normal life, you keep pushing it down your to-do list, and then it may never happen. And then it was kind of like all of that was for nothing. So the easier you can make it to connect with others and take that conversation beyond the event, the more likely people will actually find value in your events. Because how many of us attend conferences and events specifically for the express purpose of meeting people, and then we don't because of just little barriers in our way that are very easily jump overable.
Audette suggested something, and I'm going to go ahead and have you do it, Bailey. Give us three tips. You've just given us one. What are some more tips on ways that attendees going to an event can prepare themselves to take better advantage of the networking opportunities?
I think if you can remember that when people feel seen by you, they're more likely to have good vibes about you, right? So this comes into play when you're in a conversation. Ask a follow-up question, for the love of God. If somebody tells you something, all you have to do, you can just even repeat back what they said, like, "Oh, you live in San Francisco and you're about to have a baby? Tell me more. Like, what is that like? Like, are you nervous about pushing strollers up the high hills? Are you gonna whatever, right? Like, pick literally anything to ask more, because then they get to expand upon the thing they just told you about. They get to feel seen and heard by you, which is all any of us freaking want, right? At the end of the day, we want to feel like somebody cares that we're speaking. And it's also very vulnerable to share something, and then it sucks when somebody just moves on to the next thing or steamrolls you by sharing their own thing instead of like receiving what you gave them and then showing them, I heard you, right? And then I think the idea of being able to think of yourself as a helper, kind of like Audette said, with like your secret mission, being able to think, okay, I want to obviously make some connections for myself. I want to have phone calls or whatever the follow up is set up before I even go home from this event. I want my calendar to have some follow ups. And I want to connect at least 2 people to each other before the end of this event. So that also helps you really like stay embodied in the present moment when you're talking to people, because then you're listening way more deeply than if you're just waiting your turn to talk, which is what most of us do because it's an anxiety and nervousness thing, right? You're practicing your one-liner, you're ready. But in reality, it sounds counterintuitive, but the less you can be thinking about the next thing you're going to say, and the more you can just stay hyper present in the conversation, the more your brain is going to start connecting dots, right? So if I'm hearing little clues and somebody mentions, oh yeah, I live here and I'm in this industry and I'm, whatever, I can then start building a catalog of things about that person that I can then reference when I'm meeting other people that at the event, right? And that just helps. I mean, I'm a super connector, and so maybe everybody's brain doesn't work that way, but that's how my brain works. I'm always collecting data about each person and whatever they're sharing with me so that I can use that to be of service to them down the road with other people as I meet people that seem like they should be somebody that they should know.
Fantastic tips. There's so many little things in there. I want to just jump on the super connector word that you said, because I think what you do is something that every event needs people like you at the event who are working the event, not necessarily teaching, but just
Right.
by helping people meet each other. It actually has a profound effect on the entire event because other super connectors will raise their hands and start doing it too. Because typically 20 to 30% of people have propensities in that direction. So I think that one tip right there, if you can identify those people and release them, whether you need to hire someone like Bailey or just realize there's probably someone in your community already who has those gifts, and maybe you have them in the wrong role. You've got them behind the registration desk and they should be out working the event or whatever. So
Exactly.
that would be my tip. I want to go around the horn here and give everybody a chance to offer one last tip. So, Audette, what's one thing that you love seeing done at events, whether it's your own events or somebody else? One tip that you wish everybody did more of?
Well, a clever thing that I do at events that are either specifically conference or networking events is I print up a QR code of my LinkedIn. And then I either put it on the back of my badge if it's a conference. And so when I'm talking to somebody and, oh, I gotta go here, do you want to connect on LinkedIn? I just flip my badge and then they scan it. I don't know why our LinkedIn should already just be built into our badges. Note to conference organizers, but they're often not. So people are like, oh, that's so clever. And at parties, I will sometimes like actually tape it onto a bracelet or something. And I have like a butterfly around it. It's like my social butterfly. And I'll be like, oh, scan my social butterfly if you want to connect. So that's just something people are always like, oh, it's so clever. And it's just printing up a QR code of one easy connection point that can be a follow-up and having people scan it. So that's a very kind of practical networking tip.
I love that. And sometimes it's those very simple things that people don't think about doing that make all the difference. Michaela, let's go to you. What's one final tip that you'd love to offer?
I think going into every single, not even just an event, like not just a conference, but any sort of social situation with a game plan. I think that for years, I just kind of said a prayer, hope for the best, and showed up. And sometimes that works and sometimes that doesn't work because you're not in the right mind frame. And I think that for me, really having a routine, I'm a big like believer in like routines and getting into the right headspace. I look at any sort of social event, I've got a playlist on my phone. You know, I have a whole routine of like having a shower, starting with like some soft music and then like gearing up to like rock and roll right before I'm going to go out the door, some Beyonce. Having a whole routine, I use essential oils. I have a whole thing. Is going to really make a big difference. And I know for me, not trying to fit myself into the box of, you know, being at an event, one of my favorite events was the very first social media marketing world that I went to. And I was speaking, it was my first time speaking. I was really nervous. And rather than staying at a hotel nearby, if it's not my toddler, it's going to be my dog. I rented an Airbnb. And it was in Little Italy, so it was close, but not too close. And having that physical space where I had like kind of my sanctuary, it was like a bachelorette pad, really helped me to prepare. And I think that made a really big difference that first year when I needed to be on my A game when I showed up. And so really taking a deep look at like, what do I need to show up at my very best? And it might be totally different for you than it is for somebody. Some people actually like to go to the event ahead of time. They want to see the space. They might show up early. The idea of showing up early before my talk, no, thank you. But for some people that works really well. So figuring out what it looks like for you to have like a really great game day routine, I think is going to make all the difference in the world. And don't worry about being introverted or being socially anxious, because I think that there are so many people. You mentioned somebody at a recent event that absolutely killed it until they were in the elevator, right? And some of us is the same thing until we get on the airplane. So just show up as you are, and there is a space for you.
How about you, Phil?
For me here.
Phil, do you have a one tip for us?
Well, I gave it the super connector one. It would be my biggest tip that I would give anyone. I think, but I do have one additional one. You know, we've talked about one size doesn't fit all, but I also think there's a corollary to that is large spaces are not conducive for most people. We need to break it into smaller settings, whether that's tables in a large setting where you can find people that are like you at a table, or literally you have rooms that people can go into. If you're this kind of person, here's the room for that. If you're this kind of person, mixing it up, because I think when we're in large groups of people, it's overwhelming for people to find people like them. And so, you know, to Michaela's point, you can have your game plan going in, but if the event has made it really difficult to find the kinds of people that you want to meet, then that's going to be challenging. And I always tell people, at least go to sessions where there's going to be the kinds of people trying to learn the same things that you are, and turn and say hi, because more than likely those people in that room are the kinds of people that you want to meet. And that's one of the most overlooked opportunities, because most people go into the room and they grab their phone and they wait for the session to start instead of taking advantage of the fact that these are the people who are just like me. They came to this event for the same reason as me. And so I think that's one of the other things that I would suggest to everybody. So let's close out by I'm going to put up websites for each one of you, but Audette, let's start with you. Tell everybody again a little bit about Catalyst Arts.
Yeah, we do live events. We do activations, activities, experiences, team building, and predominantly high-end entertainment for events in Northern California. And I'm down to connect with everyone on LinkedIn. So if you enjoyed this session, hit me up with a connection request.
Fantastic. All right, Bailey, let's go to you. Tell everyone again. I know you've mentioned it a couple times, but let's go to you.
Yeah, so I'm a connection facilitator, keynote speaker, workshop facilitator, who's passionate about helping people figure out how to build, nurture, and leverage relationships to achieve their goals. So hire me to kick off your event to help people understand how to maximize their connection opportunities at that event. Because I promise your NPS scores will go through the roof. If people feel like they are leaving feeling connected to the fellow attendees, they're going to be the first people to sign up for the next year's event because they know that they walked away with quality humans added to their network. So I'm your girl.
And I can testify that having someone like Bailey at your event does make a massive difference. I've not worked with Bailey yet, but I know that having someone like that on your team will make a huge difference. Let's go to you, Michaela. Go ahead and talk about your book, since that's the thing you've got coming out soon.
Yeah. So my book comes out in February 2025. It's called No Fear Networking, A Guide to Building Connections for the Socially Anxious Professional. If this is something that you think that you might be struggling with, that even if you just want to get better at networking, even for people that are really extroverted and totally confident in most social situations, there are so many tips in terms of breathing, about conversation tips, communication tips, things that I found through just talking to real experts, psychologists, event planners, people that are absolutely crushing it in every social situation imaginable. If this is something that's interesting to you, I encourage you to check out the pre-order that's available now on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Indigo, all the places. And then it is officially coming out in February 2025. I have had people ask me if there's going to be an audiobook version. I get it. Like, I am not going to read my own hard copy. I'm going to wait for the audiobook for myself too. So that is in the works. So we're just waiting for it to be picked up and licensed. And that should be coming out 4 to 6 weeks after the release of the book.
All right. So Michaela knows this, but Bailey and Audette, you don't know this. I always end these interviews by playing what I call my signature sign off, which is I pull my saxophone out and play a response to our conversation. I have not played it yet today, so it may squeak the first time I play. But what I like to do is ask each one of you for one word that stands out from this conversation. If it can be emotional, that's all the better because it's easier for me to play. So Bailey, what's a word that stands out for you?
Intentional.
All right, Audette.
Belonging.
And Michaela, all right.
Resilient.
Ooh, I like it. All right, intentional, belonging, and resilient. All right, I'm not going to add a word because I'm going to give the final word through my horn. If you guys can all mute yourself, it works better so that we can not have any echoes going on. I never know how it's going to go. Thank you very much, ladies.
Thanks for having us, Phil. Thanks for the invitation. And what a great conversation, everyone.
Yes.
Fantastic conversation. Really enjoyed it. We could do it for another hour, but not today. We'll do it again sometime.
In.
All right. Very good.